Good morning, boys and girls. So we're going to read a chapter from Stuart Little, Margallo, chapter 8. Because he was so small, Stuart was often hard to find around the house. His father and his mother and his brother George seldom could locate him by looking for him. Usually they had to call him, and the house often echoed with cries of, "Stuart!" You would come into a room and he might be curled up into a chair. "Paloma." But you wouldn't see him. "Paloma." Mr. Little was in constant fear of losing him and never finding him again. "What's the matter, Boo-Boo?" He even made him a tiny red cap, such as hunters wear, so that he would be easier to see. One day when he was 7 years old, Stuart was in the kitchen watching his mother make tapioca pudding. He was feeling hungry, and when Mrs. Little opened the door of the electric refrigerator to get something, Stuart slipped inside to see if he could find a piece of cheese. He supposed, of course, his mother had seen him, and when the door swung shut and he realized that he was locked in, it surprised him greatly. "Help!" he called. "It's dark in here. It's cold in the refrigerator. Help! Let me out. I'm getting colder by the minute." But his voice was not strong enough to penetrate the thick wall. In the darkness, he stumbled and fell into a saucer of prunes. The juice was cold. Stuart shivered, and his teeth chattered together. It wasn't until an hour later that Mrs. Little again opened the door and found him standing on a butter plate, beating his arms together to try to keep warm, and blowing on his hands and jumping up and down. "Paloma, you just can't sit still today, sweet." "Mercy!" she cried. "Stuart, my poor little boy." "How about a nip of brandy?" said Stuart. "I'm chilled to the bone." But his mother made him some hot broth instead and put him to bed. Even so, Stuart caught a bad cold, which turns into bronchitis, and Stuart had to stay in bed for almost 2 weeks. During his illness, the other members of the family were extremely kind to Stuart. Mrs. Little played tic-tac-toe with him. George made him a soap bubble pipe and a bow and arrow. Mrs. Little made him a pair of ice skates out of 2 paper clips. And here's a picture of Stuart recovering in his little bed. And there he is in the refrigerator, shivering. And it's dark. You know, when you close the door of a refrigerator, the light goes out. One cold afternoon, Mrs. Little was shaking her dust cloth out of the window when she noticed a small bird lying on the windowsill. She brought it in and put it near the radiator, and in a short while it fluttered its wings and opened its eyes. It was a pretty little hen bird, brown with a streak of yellow. The Littles didn't agree on what kind of bird she was. "She's a wall-eyed vireo," said George scientifically. "I think she's more like a young wren," said Mr. Little. Anyway, they fixed a place for her in the living room and fed her and gave her a cup of water. Soon she felt better and went hopping around the house, examining everything with the greatest rate of interest. Presently she hopped upstairs and into Stuart's room, where he was lying in bed. "Hello," said Stuart. "Who are you? Where did you come from?" "My name is Margallo," said the bird, softly, in a musical voice. "I come from fields once tall with wheat, from pastures deep in fern and thistle. I come from vales of meadowsweet, and I love to whistle." Stuart sat up in bed. "Say that again," he said. "I can't," said Margallo. "I have a sore throat." "So have I," said Stuart. "I have bronchitis. You better not get too near me. You might catch it." "I'll stay right here by the door," said Margallo. "You can use some of my gargle if you want. And here are some nose drops, and I have plenty of Kleenex." "Thank you very much. You're very kind," replied the bird. "Did they take your temperature?" asked Stuart. He was worried about his friend. "No, but I don't think it will be necessary," said Margallo. "Well, we better make sure. I would hate to have anything happen to you." "Here," and he tossed her the thermometer. Margallo put it under her tongue, and she and Stuart sat still. She took it out and looked at it. Boys and girls, this is back in the olden days when you didn't have digital thermometers. You had to put it under your tongue, and you had to wait for a few minutes to see if you had a temperature. And if you wanted to stay home from school, you hoped and hoped and hoped that you had a temperature, because if you had a temperature, you could stay home from school. Normal, she announced. Stuart felt his heart leap for gladness. It occurred to him he had never seen any creature so beautiful as this tiny bird, and he already loved her. I hope that my parents have fixed you up with a nice place to sleep, he said. Yes, said Margalla. I'm going to sleep in the Boston fern on the bookshelf in the living room. It's a nice place for a city location. And now, I think I should go to bed. It's dark outside, and I always go to bed at sundown. Good night. Good night, Stuart. Good night, Margalla, called Stuart. That's a mighty fine bird, he whispered. When Mrs. Little came in later to tuck Stuart in and to hear his prayer, Stuart asked if she thought the bird would be safe sleeping in the living room. Quite safe, my dear, said Mrs. Little. But what about Snowbell? Asked Stuart. Snowbell won't touch the bird. You go to sleep and don't worry about it. Stuart closed his eyes and lay in the dark. But he found it difficult to fall asleep. He tossed and turned. I can't sleep, knowing that Margallo is in danger. So he climbed out of bed, put on his slippers and his robe, tiptoed downstairs. Sick as I am, he said, this has got to be done. Being careful not to make a sound, he shimmied up the lamp cord by the bookshelf and onto the shelf. And there he could see Margallo asleep. Sleep well upon thine eyes and be peace, he whispered. He had heard that in the movies. He hid behind a candlestick and waited. For half an hour he saw nothing. When the clock struck 10, Stuart saw two gleaming yellow eyes. Whose eyes do you think they are? I think it's Snowbell. The eyes came nearer. Snowbell crept softly toward the bookshelf and climbed up the chair within reach of the fern where Margallo was asleep. He crouched, ready to spring. This is the finest thing I've ever done, said Stuart. He stepped up behind the candlestick, knelt down, bent his bow, and took aim at Snowbell's left ear. He shot the arrow into the cat's ear. Snowbell squealed with pain and jumped up and down. So he has a little tiny bow and arrow, and he shot the arrow into Snowbell's ear. Snowbell ran off toward the kitchen. A direct hit, said Stuart. Thank heaven. Well, that's a good night's work done. And he threw a kiss toward Margallo's sleeping form. It was a tired little mouse that crawled into bed a few minutes later. Tired, but ready for sleep at last. And the next chapter, boys and girls, is A Narrow Escape. And here's a picture of Stuart aiming his bow and arrow at Snowbell, who wanted to eat Margallo, who was sleeping in the Boston fern. All right, boys and girls, have a great day.